What's going on, YouTube, and welcome to Goal Line Hockey. It's your boy Kevin Forte, and today we are going to be taking a look at the breaking trade that happened yesterday between the Tampa Bay Lightning, Detroit Red Wings, and the Seattle Kraken. Yanni Gourde is once again a member of the Tampa Bay Lightning. We're going to break down this blockbuster trade here in today's video. So, the trade deadline quickly approaching here tomorrow. If you're watching this video when it's posted, stay tuned. We'll be doing a live stream from 9 a.m. up until 1 p.m. Eastern on trade deadline day. So stay tuned for that coverage. I'm really looking forward to that live stream. A lot of you guys only watch my live streams, so it'll be nice to interact with all of you. If you're looking to chat, make sure to check that out. So with that out of the way, let's look at this deal, because there's a lot of moving pieces in this deal that it's not an overly complicated trade, but there's a lot going on here if you kind of break down the actual nitty gritty. So let's start off with the fact it's a 3-team trade. At first, it looked like it was just going to be between Seattle and Tampa Bay. And then you kind of break down and crunch the numbers and you're thinking, I don't think the numbers are going to work here. And then all of a sudden we find out that there's a retention of salary for the Detroit Red Wings, which obviously they get the incentive of a conditional 4th-round pick. And voila, now we have a 3-team trade. That makes things a lot more complicated. So let's just break down the two teams here. The easiest part of this deal, which is the Seattle Kraken being sellers at the deadline, selling to the Tampa Bay Lightning. I know, shocking. So the Tampa Bay Lightning acquire forwards Oliver Bjorkstrand and Yanni Gourde, as well as NCAA prospect rights defenseman Kyle Aucoin. In exchange, the Seattle Kraken acquire Mikey Eyssimont, a 2025 second-round pick. That's a Toronto draft pick. No conditions on that pick. And then there is a 2026 and a 2027 first-round pick, both of the Tampa Bay Lightnings. Both of those are conditional draft picks. So we'll break down the conditions of that deal, and then we'll break down the Red Wings, which let's get this part out of the way, because I feel like this is the least significant part of the deal. A 2025 4th-round conditional pick, the higher of Tampa Bay or Edmonton's pick. That's a 4th-round pick, so it's going to be the higher of those picks, and then 25% retention on Yanni Gourde's remaining contract. All right, now that we got the Detroit side out of the way, we can push them to the side. Now let's talk about what Seattle gets here. So Seattle, obviously being a seller at the deadline here, they lose some pretty good players. I mean, these are top 6 players that the Seattle Kraken just sold to the Tampa Bay Lightning. And I like what they got in return, in all honesty. I think this is a trade that in the moment, it kind of sucks for some of those other guys on this team. You know, Capo Caco, Shane Wright, especially guys like Eeli Tolvanen, Chandler Stevenson. They've played with Bjorkstrand pretty much all season. So it definitely kind of hurts for them, seeing him leave. Yanni Gourde, also a really good player. Like, I think this is a player that I think Tampa Bay is saying, listen, he's technically listed on the 4th line, you know, with Seattle, but like, he's going to be a better player when he's on our team. He's got the chemistry with all the guys in Tampa, right? Like, there's reason to believe, kind of like JT Miller with the Rangers, right? Like, he was able to make it work here. We're going to go back to what's proven. We know it's worked in the past. And that's kind of what they did here with Yanni Gourde. He's only got 6 goals on the season, 17 points. But in terms of his overall player rating, he's a really good, probably 3rd-line player for the Tampa Bay Lightning. He's going to kill penalties. He's going to add depth scoring. And he scores crucial goals. If there's a big playoff game late in the 3rd period, you know, in overtime, they're not going to be afraid to throw Yanni Gourde out on the ice, which I think is a plus. And I'm sure there was some input there from the coaching staff there in Tampa Bay. I know that John Cooper loves players like Yanni Gourde. It made a ton of sense right off the rip. Now, the other part of this deal is Oliver Bjorkstrand, who has had much better numbers. I don't think people are really, you know, everybody's excited to see Yanni Gourde back in Tampa, but like, Oliver Bjorkstrand's putting together what's looking like, especially if he's playing in Tampa, potentially on the 2nd line, he's already got 16 goals this season. He's on pace for probably 25 goals this year if he plays the rest of the season with the Tampa Bay Lightning, which is pretty impressive. You know, Oliver Bjorkstrand's kind of bounced around the league a little bit, but this is a really good fit for him. I think this is the right team for him. It's a good fit for the Tampa Bay Lightning. It makes a ton of sense why they made this deal. And then Keith Aucoin this is a defensive prospect. Obviously, Tampa sees something in this player. They wouldn't be just randomly plucking this guy for no reason. That could end up being a really interesting part of this deal in the future, depending on what a coin ends up becoming. Keep an eye out on that one. So now let's get to the Seattle side of things to kind of round out the value of this deal. So they acquire Mikey Eyssimont, who this is, again, another player that has been kind of in and out of the lineup for Tampa Bay most of the year. But now that you've added Bjorkstrand and Yanni Gourde, he wasn't going to find a spot on the roster anyway. Now that, like this is a team now that kind of has themselves kind of solidifying a little bit, finding that rhythm. And I think what's interesting with Tampa Bay, as different as a lot of the players on this team look, the core of this team is still mostly intact, mostly the same. So you've got your top line of Gensel, Point, Kucherov, Hagel, Cirelli, Bjorkstrand. That's your top six. And then Paul, Gourde, and Goncalves, who is a very good young player. They're hoping to see a little bit more from him, hopefully in the playoffs. But again, you're adding stability there. So Mikey Eyssimont wasn't going to have a spot in this lineup, and that's kind of what I want to bring back here. Mikey Eyssimont is a young player with potential. He's got a little bit of upside. And with Seattle, he's probably going to get some more ice time. He's going to get more opportunities to prove himself at the NHL level. So we'll see how that goes. Now, you also get a 2025 second-round pick. It's Toronto's pick, so it's probably going to be later in the second round, right? Assuming Toronto makes the playoffs, it's probably not going to be anywhere near the top 16 in the second round. So you're probably looking at somewhere between maybe 45 to 50 to, if maybe Toronto won the cup, maybe even pick 60 to 64. Who knows? But it's going to be somewhere between there. It's going to be a later pick. But then you've also got the conditional first round draft pick. So the first condition on this year's pick, the 2026 pick, which is going to be it's going to be next year's pick. Crazy for me to think they had this year's first round pick. Next year's first round pick, it is top 10 protected. So if the Tampa Bay Lightning miss the playoffs next season, they aren't doing so well, that pick is basically lottery protected. But if it is, let's say it is the 9th or 10th pick, I think Tampa Bay would have the ability to say, you know what, we'd rather give you this pick than next year's pick. I think that could be part of the deal. I don't know for certain, but that's also, it's more or less lottery protected, right? And then the 2027 first round pick is also top 10 protected. So there's a scenario here, very much a scenario here, where we have something where we saw a couple years ago, where Erik Karlsson, right, that trade that sent him to the San Jose Sharks, the Ottawa Senators at the time looked like they lost that trade until they didn't. This could very much turn into a deal where if Seattle played their cards right, because you have to consider, Tampa doesn't have their first round pick this year, right? So we're talking about next year's draft or 2 years from now, potentially, and even beyond that. Because hypothetically, if Tampa Bay decides not to trade their first round picks over the next 2 years, I don't know the exact details of this, but if this is the way I'm reading it, technically this could be a 2028 and 2029 first round picks going to the Seattle Kraken from Tampa Bay. And how good is Tampa Bay going to be in 2028 and 2029, hypothetically? This could be a really interesting trade in the future. And it's something that, we're talking about 2028 and 2029 when probably we're going to have flying cars and all that stuff, right? And teleportation. The reality is that's a trade that down the line, Seattle might really, really benefit from. Because at that point, if they use the top 10 protection on both of these picks in 26 and 27, well, there's nothing for 28 and 29. And then you end up having a situation like Erik Karlsson where you kind of decided to keep your pick the year after, and then you're worse 2 years later, and now that pick is even higher than top 10. You get what I'm saying. This is going to be very interesting to see how this plays out. If Tampa Bay wins the cup, the ideal scenario in this trade for both teams is Tampa Bay wins a cup the next 2 years. Or, let's just say this. Let's say they win the cup 1 year. Let's say they win the cup this year or next year. They win one cup, okay, with this group. One of those two picks ends up being a top 10 lottery pick potentially in 2028 or 2029, and both teams will feel like they won this trade. I think that is probably how both teams are looking at from their side here. So, you know, I think we all know the way that Julien Brisebois kind of runs things in Tampa Bay. He said the other day, as much so, you know, I have more value in skilled, good hockey players than I do in draft picks for years from now. Interesting approach. At some point, it might come back to bite him. But for now, the Tampa Bay Lightning have their core. They have their good players. So what's the point in drafting young players? Yeah, you'd love to have younger players that are cheaper on entry-level contracts. Great. But you know what? They have a really good core here. And they rebuilt themselves from the ground within, right? Keeping Kucherov, keeping Point, acquiring guys over the years like Cirelli, letting them draft through the system. Brandon Hagel bringing him in a couple years ago. Nick Paul was a guy brought in a couple years ago. Jake Gensel in free agency last year to replace Stamkos. There's been a lot of change going on with the Tampa Bay Lightning. So as much as this team continues to get older and continues to look like a team that's maybe in the decline, I maybe wouldn't say that quite yet, because there's a lot of players here that are still in their prime and still really good. Like Nikita Kucherov and Braden Point and some of those other players. They're really talented. And then you see guys like Victor Hedman, who should have been slowing down. He freaking had a ripper of a shot the other night against the Columbus Blue Jackets. He's still on top of his game. This is going to be a really interesting deal in the future. This is a deal that right now, today, is a real win for the Tampa Bay Lightning. But if Seattle can maybe snag a great draft pick in 2028 or 2029, unprotected from Tampa Bay, maybe barring their failure over the next 2 years, one of those years they have to fail, and then they take that pick, well, now that means it's unprotected. And that means free reign for the Seattle Kraken going into 2030. We'll see what happens. It's a long way away. It feels like that at least, but I can definitely see what the Kraken are doing here, and it might pay off for them. So let me know what you guys think down below. What do you think of this trade? Overall, it's a good trade for both teams, but I would love to know what you think in the comment section down below. Make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. Like I've been saying throughout this video, stay tuned for our live stream tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Eastern. I am so excited. I have not done a live stream yet this year, so I'm really looking forward to catching up with a bunch of you guys. And if you're new to the channel, maybe drop by and say hi for a little bit, right? I'll give you guys updates throughout the trade deadline and all that stuff. I'll be posting a trade deadline preview actually after this video, so stay tuned for that as well. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again next time.